This is going to be one of the most toxic videos I've ever made. Hello everyone, Bront, CatHerder here. We're having some fun talking Raid Shadow Legends, and we are here on the main account, but honestly, it's not going to matter too much. I want to dive into the subject of poisons, and honestly, I want to kind of dive into the history of the poison meta from basically back when I started. So I started 4.5, 5 years ago almost. I don't exactly remember. It's been a long time. I'm old. Give me some breaks. It's a fun, interesting little topic because poisons have had a fun history in Raid and have kind of dropped down in their prominence significantly and have more recently risen back up in a different place. And in many ways, it actually shows a very healthy meta shift in Raid, but at the same time, some of that meta shift has been kind of toxic, you know, pun intended. Let's talk a little bit about it. First of all, we're going to talk about some of the OG goats of Raid, which is poisoners. So by filtering out my factions by poisoners, we can certainly see that there are an awful lot of champions that do poison in some way, shape, or form. Some of them are not your traditional poisoners, like Mithrala Lifebane. She has poisons on the A1, very useful poisons. In fact, they're actually one of the still current meta uses for her is to use her in poisons in teams you are using her in, because the few champions that she tends to be really good at are still vulnerable to poisons. On the other hand, we have, of course, you know, Tomb Lord here. He actually got a buff, and everyone loved the fact that he got a buff to throw out 4 poisons instead of 2 on this ability here. We've got Zavia. As you can see, my Zavia here, a +2 Zavia, the first legendary I ever pulled on my original account, and I used her all over the place for a long time, and it was all about her dropping some poisons and then exploding them, which was a big deal. Venus even has some A1 poisons again. A1 poisons are nice. Kymar has some poisons, but not really. More recently, Vermin Lord here, he does poisons when his bombs explode. They turn into poisons, or when people cleanse them, they turn into protected poisons, actually. So it's actually kind of a fun way to make sure you kill some people. Elenarl and Zavia are kind of the 2 original poison explosion teams, and we'll certainly talk about them. We've got Theodore the Savant. He's one of the later champions that kind of played into the poison meta and kind of changed it completely. There was a period of time where Theodore the Savant was the most dominant champion in Raid that wasn't a PvP champion. Everyone wanted one. As you can see, I actually have 2 of them built, although this one's not fully booked. And yeah, having 2 of them was actually really useful as well. We have the more recent fusion of Stock the Broken. Stock the Broken's kind of a callback to a Theodore-esque era champion. Still very good, has other interesting uses as well. And of course, Bad Alcazar, one of the original main big soloer champions in Raid. And then finally, one of the champions I do want to point out as well, one of my absolute favorites, Eurogrim right here, who was kind of a midi Bad L, but with Eurogrim and the right gear, you could solo dungeons with him without really much of a problem. So we're going to talk a little bit about those champions and why poisons were so meta early on. In a world where there were no hard dungeons. Seriously though, before there were hard dungeons, we only had the normal dungeons. And as a result, the bosses were all vulnerable to poison. While Fire Knight had its own strategy involving turn meter control and being able to drop the shield and keep the shield down, Ice Golem and Dragon, some of the better ways to deal with them, particularly Ice Golem, which is why I'm here on Ice Golem. The Ice Golem would not do his retaliation move if he took damage from burns or poisons, and that dropped him over the thresholds. So one of the ways you could more safely deal with the normal Ice Golem was to poison him down. Now, one of the things they did to sort of make this more difficult is the hard one is immune to poisons, which part of what killed poisons in the first place. But we'll get to more of what killed poisons in the first place. So you could build teams of poisoners. And on top of that, before, it was super easy to get a seer that could nuke through absolutely everything because you could get the right blessings to do it. Plus you could get all the extra crit damage. Plus it was harder to farm different stats from gear. One of the better ways to clear waves was to actually have what was termed a poison explosion team. So if we go in here to this team here, and I'll set up a poison explosion team and show you how one would work. So I apologize if this team is not fully speed tuned hand because I don't know if I necessarily have all the gear on these champions, but I wanted to kind of show you the concept of how this team was supposed to work. So what you would have is you would have a lead of some kind. This would be a solo champion. I'm going to use Eurogrim because I like the fact that he has the speed aura, which made these a little bit easier to deal with. And I know mine is actually built to do this sort of stuff as well. And Eurogrim is a fun champion. So it was actually kind of nice to show you how accessible this was, that you could do this with, I mean, you don't even need the Kymar there. You could use a Renegade, for example, but you could do this with one of a couple Poison Exploder champions. So you would use Eurogrim to start off, and he would do his double poisons over here. He also gives continuous heals as well. You could use then Taurus's. So you would have two of these champions built, and all they would need is speed and accuracy. And then they would do this ability here, which would put up to 4 poisons up here. Now, you didn't actually need them booked, but it certainly helped. If you didn't have a Eurogrim, for example, you would probably absolutely want them booked. They put a ton of poisons up there, and it's 80% chance bookable to 100. Again, this one here, 80% chance bookable to 100. And I often didn't have these guys booked for a long time until I just needed to use the points to get some champion training points or some CVC points. I can't remember which. And you also don't even need to ascend these dudes, because ascending these dudes gives you the unkillable buff on them for 1 turn. Honestly, that is more of a curse than a blessing. Eurogrim gives me 2 poisons. Taurus gives me 4. Taurus gives me 4. And then we would have Zavia do her Deadly Catalyst, which would instantly activate all poisons debuffs on all enemies. So that would activate 20 poisons on each enemy and just absolutely obliterate them. But you would build her for, you know, as you can see, mine's missing some crit rate. I probably have some gear missing from her, but you would put her with some good crit damage, give her enough accuracy to be able to land some poisons as well, because she has poisons on the A2 and the A1. But this would wipe the waves by exploding 10 poisons, which pretty much exploding 10 poisons twice, in fact. And that was enough to kill any wave in raid without any decreased defense, without any weaken, made it very, very safe for this particular boss. And then, of course, you have Kymar here, so that when we get around to wave 2, Kymar being the fastest champion would basically reset everybody here, and you'd just go again. And then Eurogrim would do his thing. We'd do this thing here. I guess I didn't program him. And boom, through with the waves. Take 20 to 30 seconds, maybe a little longer, depending on how quick the animations were on here, maybe a little shorter, and you are at the boss. And finally at the boss, well, I don't want her to explode the poisons because I want the poisons to tick on the boss when they can. Meanwhile, I wouldn't mind if he got the poisons back up, but I don't want the unkillable because I don't want these guys living around. And then basically everyone else would die, and Eurogrim would slowly but surely finish the boss off by putting poisons up on the A3 as well as his A1, and then surviving because he had the continuous heals here. He could cleanse himself. You built him with enough resistance. He would resist the block healing that could be on here. You put him in regeneration and mortal gear, and Eurogrim would be fast enough, tanky enough, with enough regeneration to survive against the boss. And this team worked on Ice Golem and works on Dragon as well. You get a bunch of poisons up there. The poisons whittle the boss down, and it's actually very, very quick to speed run the bosses on the normal dungeons with this team. It made, back when you were struggling with presets, because we had to share presets with every area of the game other than Arena, had to share the same 15 presets. So being able to make a single team that could do Ice Golem on 20 or 25 and Dragon on 20, 24, and 25 without a problem, and to be fair, this probably could do Ice Golem 24 as well, this was super easy. The big problem you're going to have with this particular team on Ice Golem 24 is I believe Ice Golem 24 is Spirit. Maybe Ice Golem 20 is Spirit too. So the Zavia team works better on Ice Golem 25 than it would on 20 or 24. So yeah, it was a nice, easy team. Basically was quick and 100%. Very, very easily 100%. The only tricky part was to make sure that Eurogrim was tanky enough to be able to take maybe a retribution hit from the boss every once in a while. He would throw the poisons up there. If the ads managed to live around and stick around, they would eventually poison themselves and kill themselves as well. So you could, so it really wasn't super dangerous. If you really wanted to, you could certainly try to keep Zavia's Deadly Catalyst there and hope you block revive the minions, and then you'd never have to worry about them again. But honestly, this team would work fine. It would run in a minute to a minute and a half and was super easy. And that worked just fine for quite a long time until Theodore arrived. And Theodore became even better. So What did Theodore change about these poison teams? Well, Theodore gave you this wonderful ability here to put poison sensitivity up. Poison sensitivity would add, an extra 50 to 25%, I guess in this case, 25% extra poison damage per poison tick. So you wouldn't need as many poison ticks, but it also would speed up against the boss because 2 poisons were much more effective. And if you could get 4 poisons or 6 poisons, it was even better. But what really made him special and still makes him special to this day is this chemistry thing here, where it increases the duration of all poison debuffs and HP burn debuffs on all enemies by 1 turn, and then instantly activates all of them for 1 tick. So basically, you got a free activation of poison and burn. And against the Ice Golem, as we mentioned before, these ticks of poisons did not trigger the retributive attack, so you wouldn't get tacked while Theodore was nuking down the boss. And these just absolutely killed the boss. On top of that, he'd throw Weaken under there if they're not under poison or HP burn debuffs, not a huge big deal. And he threw decreased speed on AoE on the A1 as well. So he would slow everybody down and then constantly detonate their poisons. So he would lap the enemy repeatedly while detonating their poisons before they even got a chance to take a turn. And when they take a turn, well, boom, they're going to take more poison damage because they've got all these poisons on them as well. So he allowed for teams that could melt the waves and melt the boss even faster, making for super fast speed runs. This was where you had people doing under 1 minute's turns. To be fair, looking at this team here, the more advanced version of this, instead of Taurus's, would have been Calvalax's, because Calvalax doesn't need to take a turn and would instantly place all the poisons. So literally, you could build Calvalax's to be no speed, enough accuracy to put all the poisons out, and they would get the poisons out on before turn 1, and they would die off really quickly once the boss ever took a turn. So Calvalax is another good option for this as well. So another bit of a power creep into the poison boss here. Again, Zavia doing all the wave stuff as well. Kymar giving us the 1 reset, and very, very quick team. This is where people were getting into the sub 50 second, sub 30 second in some cases teams against Ice Golem and against the Dragon. Now, not necessarily the only best teams out there, but this was how people were doing this. And this was the meta until hard dungeons came along. But that wasn't the only meta that you could use. Theodore made this safer and faster, but you could do this with a Bad Alcazar. You could do this with a Eurogrim. You could even do this with a Tomb Lord with the right gear. You would build these champions in Regen and Immortal. You would build them super tanky. You would build them with some level of resistance in some cases, particularly for Ice Golem. And you could literally bring for food. The food would die pretty quickly, and we use these champions to just absolutely obliterate the waves and then obliterate the boss. And it might take 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. To be fair, the Bad L versions of this and the Eurogrim version of this would take the 3 minutes. The Theodore versions of these would run a lot faster because he was often setting off his own poisons without taking them down as well. So once he got a couple of poisons in and killed a bunch of people, it became a much faster run. So he would still do it in 1.5 minutes with food, which made it absolutely amazing. Gear was certainly a lot rougher back then. So oftentimes people would use level 20 instead of level 25 for this, for Ice Golem or for Dragon, depending on the affinity. But Theodore, because he is placing the poisons and because igniting poisons did not require you to hit anybody, he was actually okay at doing this in bad affinities because he would still get all the damage dealing stuff out there and be able to extend it and activate it anyway. The only thing he was worried about with the off affinity is whether or not he would get the additional critical hit chance, so maybe he might get nuked a little too often and might die from that end. But in general, Teal, great champion to be able to do this. To be fair, Bad Alcazar was also placing poisons, so he could be very helpful with that as well. So he was never really in danger against affinity. Same with Eurogrim. It was always placing poisons with that A3. So, and of course, Eurogrim being a Void champion made him not have any affinity issues at all. Plus, he had the speed aura of 20%, which is kind of nice as well. So these are not the only champions you could do this with. There's several other ones. There's Corvus the Corruptor. There's a bunch of other poison champions. Basically, any champion that threw out a ton of poisons could be a meta champion to either solo the boss when the rest of the team speed runs to it, or possibly even with food, bring a bunch of champions with and farm food as well as the dungeon. But let's talk about what changed when we moved into the hard dungeons. Now we're on stage 6 here because honestly, if you have good enough gear, Tio can still solo stage 6 and in some cases stage 10 if your gear is that good. But the reason you don't see those runs quite as often anymore is because the amount of gear that you needed to be able to do it is pretty high, although it continues to get smaller and smaller as we find more ways to get more of these stats with speed and accuracy and resistance and stuff like that with the new 9-piece sets. But also with gear ascension has certainly changed the meta with these things as well. But what has happened with the hard dungeons is they have sped up significantly. So we used to have the rule of 200, and you wanted to be 200 to a little bit faster than 200 because the waves were often not much faster than about 110 to 120. So if you were a 200 or 220 speed, you would often lap them 2 to 1. And if you were 250 or 260, you would be lapping everybody 2 to 1 minimum. And that allowed for champions that were going to do a bunch of passive damage with poisons and then activate those poisons to be able to lap the enemies repeatedly, which would make the poisoning easy. Well, once you get to stage 6, you're already talking about everybody is 150 speed. And once we get to stage 10, the boss is 250 speed. And poisoning down the boss when the boss is as fast as your champion, 250 speed. And of course, you still need the gear requirements. If you need all the accuracy, you might need all the resistance. You definitely need all the speed. And then on top of that, you need defense and HP. It'd become harder and harder to use poisons on the dragon boss, at least as your main source of damage. Now that said, you can see here, I've got Mithrala, she is there for the poisons. I have Stultus here, he is there for the reflection of the poisons. So basically, when the poisons get thrown on by the boss, Stultus mostly just throws them right back at this boss. He's got a passive that does that, it's great. Mithrala resists everything, and then she cleanses anybody she needs to cleanse. And then eventually these 3 die, and these 2 solo the boss until the boss dies from poisons, as well as some damage from Stultus, because he is built to do a little bit of damage. But he's not fast, so the waves are pretty quick, and it still works okay. On the other end, Ice Golem, the Ice Golem is now immune to poisons. So using poisons on the Ice Golem doesn't do anything other than kill the minions off, which is not super helpful. The meta here has become burns, which are another way to, down the boss. So you can see this team here that has 100%. We get Artak to the boss, and then Artak has regeneration and immortal and emergency heal, and he's got a shield, blood shield ring, and he's a tanky champion in general, and he basically continues to heal himself and put burns out there and then ignite the burns, and that burns down everybody. And this is one of these weirder teams that because you want the burns to trigger, and burns do AoE damage, they do less damage than poisons, but they do damage to everybody on the team. So what you want is you want Artak to ignite those burns and have the minions be as alive as possible. This build is basically designed to keep everybody alive, other than obviously kill the boss, and slowly but surely burn them down. But by slowly, we mean as fast as possible because we want Artak to be relatively quick. To be fair, it's a fairly similar idea to the older poison teams, but poisons just kind of stopped working here in hard dungeons. The other place poisons really kind of stopped being a super viable option is here in hard faction wars. And this is a number of things. First of all, I already talked about speed and why speed has been the enemy of poisoners. Speed means that the poisoners can't build up too much poison, but on top of that, many of these waves have ways to do things like block debuffs, they can cleanse, and those are the other 2 enemies of poisoners. If you cannot land any more poisons, it doesn't help to be poisoning and doing your damage through poison. If you can't keep up the poisons and stack enough of them up to be able to kill somebody with the poison damage before they take multiple turns, that's also a problem. And that is why these teams that were used to be poisoners were super fast and designed to be able to stack the poisons up quickly, and that was a key component of that. And then you would either ignite them or just let the enemy take a few turns and they would kill themselves after 1 or 2 turns because you would stack 8, 10 poisons on them, and that would be enough to kill them. So in hard faction wars, it's really not a great option. The bosses, yeah, some of the bosses are okay with poisons, but some of the bosses, getting to them to be able to get those poisons are so rough with a poisoner. It's just really impractical at best. One of the things I want to show you guys is how you would build one of these classic solo poisoners. Why? Because honestly, they're still very useful. Eurogrim was actually powerful enough in this build, or at least a similar build to this, where he could actually solo level 20 and level 21, I believe, Faction Wars, which was really kind of insane. Now, it would take 4 or 5 minutes, so I didn't do it, and it wasn't worth farming with food because you didn't get a lot of experience. But it was doable, which was kind of cool, and in some ways kind of the point. But these builds here will apply to not only, your Eurogrims or your Bad Alcazars, but they will also work on your Theodores or any of these solo poisoners that you're going to build. So you've got your, regeneration gear here, and we have the immortal gear here, and that is all for healing. We are looking, let's get him to the collection here. We're looking for HP and defense on these things. Now I've got double HP here, and that is fine because I have a bunch of extra defense. I probably have a defense ring here, accuracy banner, and a defense amulet right here. Generally, you don't mind if you have some defense and you want some HP. Why is defense important? Well, defense is going to reduce the amount of damage you'll take from just direct damage in general, and then HP helps you survive it. And with a lot of regeneration, the extra HP is going to heal you. So you're generally looking for at least 3,000 defense. If you can get to the 4,000 defense, that's great. You're probably looking for 70 to 80k HP minimum. Obviously, the more the merrier. You don't care about crit rate. If you can get resistance on these type of champions, that is very helpful because that means that you're not going to die from poisons against the dragon, for example. You're not going to get your healing blocked from the minions in Ice Golem, for example, as well. So resistance, very, very helpful for you, but the accuracy also as well, because you need to be able to land all these poisons. So these were very stat heavy builds, and part of why I'm showing you with Eurogrim was difficult to do in these builds before some of the Ascension, because Eurogrim didn't have, for example, see these extra stats from Blessing, that's an extra 450 defense and an extra 5,500 HP. That's a lot of extra stats just from getting a 4-star. You can get an extra 30 or 40 accuracy if he got the extra of that, and some extra resistance too, which would make him get the 5-star. Would be very, very, very helpful. Bad Al has better stats, so Bad Al was going to be easier to build in this. Plus, Bad Al put more healing up, so champions like that would become easier. Or, for example, Theodore, because he could accelerate the poisons, didn't need to be quite as tanky because he was going to do more damage faster, which meant that he didn't need to live quite as long, so you didn't have to build him quite so tanky. And then the masteries for these champions was very specific, and this works on all of them, but there's a lot of thought into why you're using these specific masteries. Now, I know in general, a lot of people think that for a PvE, you're looking for War Master, but specifically, we are looking here for Oppressor. Increases the turn meter fill rate by 2.5% for each active debuff cast by this champion, stacks up to 10%. That is 10% faster turn meter fill rate. Now, that means that you effectively have increased your speed by 10%. That is huge. So that brought you from maybe taking 2 turns against the boss when the boss's was maybe 100 to 125 speed to maybe 3 turns. Because if you can get yourself to 250 to 275 speed, plus you could increase your speed in other ways, and then 10% extra turn meter fill, this stuff all adds up. Again, you want all the accuracy, that makes some sense. For solo champions, you want some ability to heal, so this is very helpful as well. You want the, again, extra accuracy is helpful. We want all the extra turn meter, so when buffs are expiring, you want that 10% extra turn meter, so 30% chance is great, but when you're lining up 7, 8, 9, 10 buffs, that's a guaranteed at least 10% turn meter, probably closer to 30 or 40% in some cases. So that's very helpful. It's very stat intensive, so Lore of Steel is very helpful. You want to be able to get out your poisons more, so Cycle of Magic can be very, very helpful. We're bringing food for a lot of these builds, so Spirit Haste can be very helpful, and if we're not bringing food, we're still also bringing the boss, often making sure that these champions are going to be soloing the boss. So eventually you're planning on your allies dying. That's a free way to get extra speed. And then, of course, Master Hexer means that these poisons that we're going to land are going to last a little bit longer. And the easiest way to build up those poisons is to get some of those 3-turn duration poisons instead of 2-turn duration poisons. So as the boss takes turns, not all of the poisons fall off. Now that means you're not getting some of the turn meter boost we were talking about earlier, but it means you don't have to land quite as many for him to take a bunch of poison damage. So that's very helpful. Meanwhile, We want the crit rate here. We are looking for damage inflicted by 5% increasing when you're under 50% HP. Because they are soloing, there's a chance that they might end up at under 50%. You could certainly argue that maybe you want to go with Heart of Glory instead if you suspect they're always going to be at 100%. More damage in any way, very, very helpful. Whirlwind of Death, honestly, I believe this was just a case, well, actually no, 6 speed by every enemy killed by this champion. Well, it doesn't say how they have to be killed. You own the kill if you kill them via poison. So this is another way to get yourself 18 more speed. Life Drinker is another way to get yourself some healing. You could certainly maybe do this Swarm Smiter as well, but honestly, this isn't going to help you as much for the bosses. And 16 accuracy, if you can't make that up, I don't know what you're doing. Or maybe you just need better gear. So Life Drinker, kind of important for keeping you alive if you're low on health here. Wrath of the Slain, damage increases by 5% for each dead ally. Now that's not going to affect your poisons, but you know what? We're looking for damage any way we can, so you're attacking in a couple of these attacks, so might as well get some damage out of it as well. And then finally, Kill Streak, another way to get more damage as you kill people as well. The end result is this has been maxed for the ability to do repeated poison damage, and these masters are great on any of your poisoners, and honestly still work very well, because poisoners still work in Centranos in some floors. Poisoners can still work against some of the bosses in Doom Tower, because not all of them are particularly fast. It's still helpful in a couple of other areas. I'm not telling you that poisons are useless in the areas I was talking about. I'm just saying that poisons are not as meta as they used to be, and relying on poison damage alone is difficult in the harder difficulties of Raid Shadow Legends. Are you looking to join me and have fun playing Raid Shadow Legends? Well, I've got the link for you. Use my link down below and get yourself a free Elenarl once you get through the tutorial. Elenarl is a great legendary, does a bunch of poisons, does irresistible burns, explodes those poisons, going to be very, very great for progressing in the early game, great for your clan boss team, will really, really help you out. And then at level 15, get yourself an Ugo. Ugo is absolutely amazing. She is one of the best endgame epics. She brings your block debuffs, she brings your decreased defense, she's got a heal and a cleanse, she's got leech on that A1, she is super tanky, she's got a chance to revive. Absolutely amazing epic for you. All you need to do is start a brand new account using a brand new fresh email and use my link down below. Get started in Raid and have some fun. One of the things that has actually happened, that has changed in Raid recently, however, is with the Arachnelixir, we now have poisoners showing up in the arena. Now, we have always had this blessing here that honestly was never particularly great here, so let's get you to the collection so I can change that. And we have always had this lethal dose, which allowed people in arena and siege battles to do additional damage, 50% additional poison damage, 100%, 200%. You can also ignore defense eventually with those as well. That is huge for doing actual damage. And if you can get 4 poisons out and then increase their damage by 200%, that suddenly becomes much more viable in places like Arena. Now, it still didn't quite bring through the poison meta into Arena because you still have this pesky problem of Stone Skin and block debuffs prevent you from landing these poisons. So the poison meta was still never particularly great, but that changed with the Nell champion who can place poisons through everything but Stone Skin. So as a result, it doesn't matter if you have block debuffs or not, Nell can poison you, Nell can use this lethal dose to do a bunch of extra damage, and then on top of that, with the Arachnelixir, you can add attack damage to those poisons as well. So if you can get 2, 3, 4 poisons to detonate on somebody, you are doing not just the 5% of their max HP per hit, but now you're doing 15% of their max HP per hit, plus each poison is now doing their attack value. So if we look at Stock the Broken, it's not a lot, it's, 2,500 here, so Stock the Broken probably not the best example of a good attack champion for this poison, but that is still times 4, and if that counts as poison damage for this particular blessing, well, that stacks even more. And that is why you're seeing Calvalax now in the arena, and why you are seeing Nell in the arena be as dominant as she is, because if you can get past the Stone Skins and the block debuffs, you can actually do a ton of damage in arena with poisons. But it's now different specific champions that are interesting, and in many ways they are built to counter either the speed meta, where you bring in champions that don't have Stone Skin and don't have any other way to be protected in to speed up your champions, so you're using as much speed gear as possible. Well, these poisoners like Calvalax can counter that because they'll pretty much die the first time they take a turn. But honestly, these things here, these Arachnelixirs, you see I've got it on Stock the Broken because it actually helps Stock the Broken do more damage with his poisons in the PvE stuff I'm using for. So this Arachne Elixir, it's a rare relic. It's probably overtuned and honestly probably needs a bit of a nerf because it is just probably too bonkers in Arena with all the other things you can stack on for poisons. As far as PvE goes, it is very powerful and very useful. And I've got like 2 of them. I think the other one I've got on one of my Kemptums. Yeah. And it's nice to have it on a champion that's got a bunch of extra attack and it's extra damage with the poisons and it's per poison. So yeah, 4,000 extra attack doesn't sound like much, but in Arena, 4,000 damage, well, multiplied by 4 is now 16,000 damage. Well, 16,000 damage is a third of a lot of champions' HP for the Duker's perspective, and it's still 15% of the max HP on some of the support champions. And then you add in all the other buffs you can do to poison, and suddenly poisons become something very dangerous for a lot of champions. And that is where the poison meta has moved. It has moved out of the dungeons and moved into the arena, which is kind of cool. So here you go, guys. This is a very different video, but I thought I'd kind of go over the history of poisons, as it were. Burns kind of fit in there in some ways because burn and burn activation has been a thing, but that meta actually changed a bit. That meta was in different areas of the game, and while it certainly made its way to Arena as well because burns can actually help with Stone Skin, it's a different topic. And hey, let me know if you think you'd like me to do a history of burns video. I can certainly, I'd love to talk about that sort of stuff. If you want me to dive into some of the history of raid meta and the shifting of raid meta as well, I would certainly love to hear down below. What old history meta do you think you'd like to hear about? And I think it's worth learning some of these things because as much as these are not the top tier metas in the game now, my free to play would be using some of these tricks still. If I had more poisoners and some ways to do poison explosion, which I guess I do because I do have a Zavia on that account, I could build some of these poison explosion teams. And in many ways, these poison explosion teams are more accessible than these seer blow up teams just because the seer blow up teams require a decent amount of gear. They require you to have the spare, effectively savage and lethal or whatever else. It's nice as if you have a blessing on your seer, and it helps to actually have a seer who is a void epic and therefore can be very elusive for some early to mid game accounts. So I think some of these tricks are still really kind of cool. I think it is worth noting where poisons are still usable and meta in the game today, but it's also nice to know the downside of using poisons versus what might be a more effective way to just do straight damage or to have some ways to ignite these things and, you know, just do more damage overall. So could Polarium do some better stuff with poisons? Maybe, but I don't think poisons overall are in a horrible spot in the game. They have a place, even if they're not perfect, and that's great. So hit that like button and hit that subscribe button. I really do appreciate you guys. If you want to support me, if you want to start a new raid account, you can go use that link down below. Get yourself Elenarl, gives you a poison exploder. Absolutely amazing and very relevant to this video. And get yourself an Ugo as well, who can keep some of those poisons and cleansing off you. Be very helpful as well with that decreased defense. And of course the block buffs, which can be helpful to keep things like block debuffs off the enemy so you can keep the poisons off. So it would be a very interesting team to build for poison teams. Could be a lot of fun, and they're great champions to start a brand new Raid Shadow Legends account. But anyways, I appreciate you guys hitting that like button and subscribe button as I mentioned earlier. Appreciate you guys making it to the end of this video. Much love, everyone, and until the next video, I am Bront CatHerder.